Stephen is a lawyer, he's a barrister, and he's started his career in chambers at the Inner Temples, specialising in criminal law, and spent several years as a general counsel for hedge fund managers, so he knows his way around the international scene. He has been a vigorous speaker, and I have to say that it was actually on the insistence of my committee colleagues who had heard him that we extended the invitation. They said, you must get him, because he'll really waken people up. So, Stephen, we look forward to being woken up.
Okay, thank you very much. Edward, thank you very much. I'm not sure whether you want to be woken up, because often they said I have a very loud Mancunian voice. So that often happens when Man United are winning against our favourites Man City, which upsets my brother and sister. I have been in Liverpool, yes, you're quite right, and for the past 4.5 weeks, 5 weeks nearly, we have been campaigning to try and save the life of poor Alfie Evans. But it looks like we will be to no avail. I don't really want to go into that. I want to thank you, Edward, and the campaign for an Independent Britain for inviting me this morning. I've been involved in this campaign almost in the front line for 10 years, and this is the first time I've had the great opportunity to come here and speak before you. And I want to thank your organisation and thank yourselves personally. Because if it wasn't for yourselves getting involved right at the beginning of this campaign, when we first went into Europe, there wouldn't have been an organisation that was the kernel, the beginning, for us all to get involved in. We now know there are dozens of organisations, you know, the Freedom Association, Leave Means Leave, Vote Leave, and UKIP that I was once a party of, and others that have campaigned assiduously to get us out of it. So I really want to say thank you very much for all that you have done over the past 40-odd years. And what a wonderful feeling it must have felt for all of us on that day in 2016, particularly for myself, being in Manchester, Mancunian born, being in my town hall when those votes came through. And I've got to say, even today, I still have a warm glow from actually winning and defeating all those with Project Fear who said we'd be better staying in an anachronistic, slowly declining European Union. And I'm so pleased that the British people decided that they were the best people to make that decision and put the proverbial one finger up to all of those who said we should stay in. Now, I'm probably going to get told off when my mum watches this video for actually referring to a single finger, but I was meaning it really as terms of being number one, of course, in terms of the idea. And today is Grand National Day, isn't it? You know, and I love having a flutter. I hope you do too. But I just generally didn't believe it when I looked down the runners and riders and understood that this is actually also a battle between Remainers and Leavers once again. If you look at the list of those horses, let me read out some of them. For the Remainers, at 66-1, there is Delusion of Grandeur. For those quite clearly in the camp of Tony Blair and all of his cronies, you've got I Just Know. And of course, for the Europeans, you have the Dutchman. But in Barnier, it's the Frenchman. In Juncker, it's the Luxembourg man, and everything else. But they are not pretty well backed, although they have a lot of support from those who are fighting their corner in our own parliament and in our own television and radio studios. But for the Leavers, I like the final one we've got here. We've got Final Nudge, because that does feel what we're trying to do. At 100-1, although I think it should be heavily backed, is Maggio. Because, of course, Maggio, for me, is the speech, you know, behind the name of Margaret Thatcher, who helped bring us into the idea that we should not be in a European federation. But of course, the one that I will be backing is See You at Midnight. Because it will be on midnight in March 2019 that I will leave my job as a member of the European Parliament, that we in Britain should be leaving the European Union, and we should be having our actual Brexit. And on that day, I think I will be raising a glass for at least reaching that stage. And I hope that all of you will be backing that horse today. See you at midnight. And I hope that we'll be making a lot more profit out of it than we seem to be at the moment. These are trying times in many ways for ourselves. And I just want to put a phrase that I used to read about from Thomas Paine. He said, these are times that try men's souls. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have the consolation with us that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Now, for many of us in the campaign, we thought, despite all the insults, despite the negativity, despite Project Fear, we could feel that something was bubbling in our country. We could feel that when we were knocking on the doors in Stoke or in Birmingham, when we were campaigning in the streets of the estates in London or in terms of Essex, from even in Scotland to Wales, that there was something fundamental going on with our people. Our people were tired. They were exhausted. They were fed up. They were angered that for time and time again, they had been ignored in their wishes and their desires. Not just over the way that our Parliament had been ignoring their votes. Today, again, we're looking like we might be going into a war in Syria. But I remember those who campaigned not to go into the war in Iraq. They were ignored. There were those who campaigned for fox hunting. They were ignored. There were those of us who campaigned to leave the European Union. And for a while, we were ignored. There was the expenses scandal for the MPs. There was the television companies that seemed to only support one particular view. There were the corporations that would actually be pushing down wages and demanding that we have open-door migration, which impacted the poorest in our country, as we know. Our schools and hospitals were filling up. Our roads were becoming fuller. Our costs were rising. And every time we tried to express a different opinion between the votes and the ballot box, we were technically, and often quite ruthlessly, ignored. This referendum was an opportunity for the people to say, enough is enough. We want our Britain back, and they got it, or at least that's what they thought. And as I say, on March the 29th at midnight in European time, the European treaties, as Edward has said, will cease to apply, and I should be out of a job. But we know our battle isn't over. Our battle, again, has to start. And let us look about our history. We can look in our history and say why we know we have to continue our fight. When King John was losing money with stupid battles across Europe, he had the barons push him down a line to give us Magna Carta. They wanted to have an element of freedom and remove some of those rights from them. And they got it. But also we're aware of people like the Burford Three. Three soldiers who worked and fought in the New Model Army alongside Cromwell to remove Charles I, to give parliamentary democracy. And they fought with him and they won. But they did something that was regarded as rebellious, dangerous. The Burford Three were part of a group that wrote pamphlets, thousands of them, and distributed them across the country for such dangerous ideas as a parliament where you had districts and numbers of people that you voted for by a number of people who were their elected representatives. They wanted the rule of law. They wanted a court system with a jury that would make those decisions. And these pamphleters, who became the Levellers, were almost successful in some of their ideas. But having got to power, Cromwell decided that these were dangerous individuals who couldn't exist in their country. And so he pushed them down to Burford. And in Burford, our history shows that in a small church, all the soldiers in Burford were asked to leave. And one by one, those soldiers came out, and their lives were spared. Amongst them, Corporal Tompkins was one of them who decided he didn't. And because he believed in freedom of the individual in this country, the rule of law, the right of jury, parliamentary democracy, Cromwell slayed him on the spot. From the Levellers to the Diggers, to the Pentridge Martyrs, to the Chartists, and now to this movement, the movement for a campaign for an independent Britain, we have a legacy and history of people who believe it is our right to govern ourselves and that those in our charge should be under our control. And that is why we believe in Europe, and that is why we need to campaign continuously to make sure that we get the proper Brexit, not the pseudo-Brexit that this government and others backing them want. Because as Edward has said, this period of 21 months, what is it? What does it really mean? Is it a transition period? Is it some sort of interregnum of joy? Is it a period where we're just going to clap along and be very happy and at the end of it, then we'll have our big party? No. It is part of a slow marketing campaign to soften up the British, to make sure that we don't actually leave the European Union and that we stay closely tied to them. Whether it's the EEA, whether it's EFTA, or whether what I believe, a separate agreement where we almost agree with absolutely everything the European Union wants, so that one day another political party can hold a referendum and actually vote to bring us back in. And they've left us with money being paid for, close to the organisations, with regulatory alignment with all our rules, to ensure that areas of aerospace, pharmaceuticals, financial services haven't diverged too much. Where in terms of immigration, we've allowed immigration to continue until 2021 and then have, I believe, special visas for European citizens across, which will be contrary to those of the rest of the world. So closely aligned that when Labour decide to ditch Corbyn and bring in a new glamorous Labourite, a Blairite too, beautiful to look at, charming to be dressed at, nice to hear, and they support them en masse after years of a Conservative tyranny, they will have a referendum that brings us back into the EU, and the Conservatives will say, it wasn't us, Gov. We didn't take you back in. It was those nasty Labour people. So that we'll be back to the same position, Conservatives versus Labour, but an alignment where we're back in the European Union. And that is why I'm saying to you today, we must continue this fight. We must let people know what is actually happening, and we must ensure this does not happen. Because what is the impact of this interregnum period? What will it mean to us and the people of this country if we do have a period where we're not part of a true Brexit, but this soft Brexit, or indeed, as others have said, a brino, remaining in the European Union in name only, a Brexit, I should say, in name only? Well, certainly we're going to see a politics that will continue to be increasingly divisive. No one will get over it. We'll still see families arguing with one another. We'll still hear the press where the old are regarded as stupid, where public who voted to leave are idiotic. I think we'll still see those so aggressive and nasty posters which say Remainers believe that the old should die. This level of division in our country will continue, and the politics and our politicians will continue this divide. But only by making sure that we leave can we heal the wounds of those who feel that they have been let down, those Remainers, the 48%. Because once they see that they'll still be able to travel to Europe, they'll still be able to fall in love with people from Europe and get married to them, they'll still be able to study in Europe, they'll still be able to work in Europe, they'll start to understand what was the problem. When they see that our economy as it is now, with declining unemployment and increasing employment, with greater productivity, with our ability to make our own trade deals and increasing our economic growth, they'll begin to wonder, what was the issue about in terms of this fear on our economic growth? Where's the poverty? And when they suddenly realize that the problems of our economy can now only be solved by our own parliament and our own politicians, will they then start to think, well, perhaps we need a new political system, a new place in our hearts where we can challenge our politicians, where they are responsible for our roads, our hospitals, our skills, our economies, where we can no longer blame others, and you actually have to do something. When they get that, I believe they will look upon Brexit as a triumph of democracy, a triumph over positivity over negativity. Because what did we want? I think the whole argument of Brexit was channeled in a language of control. Control of our money, control of our laws, control of our economy, control of our borders. But I believe it was something deeper, something goes into the soul of a British people. It's what I talked about when we talked about Burford and the Levellers and the Diggers and the Chartists. It's about liberty, freedom, the chance to be independent. Freedom, liberty, democracy. They roll off the tongue so easily, don't they? But we forget how hard they were won. How many lives have been lost to achieve it? How many lives have been destroyed to make sure that we can sit in this room today and hear people speak about our lives being free? As I often recall being a Mancunian, I think of the time when we had the riots in Manchester, when we had the Peterloo massacre, and close to where I studied, there is a plinth where 2 children were injured and 15 odd or more died, and hundreds were massacred simply for asking for the vote. I think about those in Wales, in Cardiff, and who were beaten by our own soldiers simply for asking for the vote. I think about those women not far from here, campaigning and standing outside our own parliament, beaten by our own police officers, simply for asking for the vote for women. We weren't asking for something huge or monumental. We're asking for the right to be free, to have liberty, to be able to do what we like within the parameters of a nation state, to control our own lives. And that is why I feel so much joy about Brexit. That is why I think the youth of tomorrow will understand what we were fighting for. Because Britain voted to leave because they wanted a better Britain, a brighter Britain, a bolder Britain. We didn't want a bitter Britain, a bigoted Britain, a biased Britain. They voted for a sovereign kingdom, not a disunited, subservient kingdom. They wanted a united kingdom, not a divided kingdom. They wanted freedom and a free, united kingdom that could look outwardly to the rest of the world and look positively to our neighbours to ensure that our children and their grandchildren would be able to live in something that we have now and not in some form of a modern tyranny run by bureaucrats. I believe that positive message is still to be had, can still be pushed, and I believe you're here to make sure that it happens and continues to happen. God willing, we'll do it and we'll keep going. Thank you very much.